Try to imagine yourself playing a very GPU-intensive game, something like Witcher 3, with a very powerful graphics card, something like a GTX 1080 Ti, but under one condition. You cannot have any fan running whatsoever. Active cooling is a trend that's been around since the late 90s. In fact, much of the early kits were sold as aftermarket units. The original PCBs did not come with fans because they weren't technically needed, even though they did get very hot. But nowadays, of course, almost any card you can buy that you can actually game on will come with a fan. But let's try not using one. Well, hold on a second. Let's not use a GTX 1080 Ti. A card like that will certainly thermal throttle after just a few seconds of the GPU being under full load. Rather, let's test something that's much less powerful and that will output significantly less heat, something like an AMD RX 470. I chose this XFX variant of the RX 470, which you can find in Best Buy and online at Amazon.com, linked in the video description, for one very specific reason. That's because you can actually remove the fans. Just like that. Now from a practical standpoint, the only reason you would want something like this is to swap out the fan LED colors, something from white to red maybe, or from white to blue. You could just manually shut off the fans if you wanted to run this test by yourself, but I do think it's cool to not have fans installed, period. It just looks weird. You don't see graphics cards like this anymore. So I took this card, void of any fans whatsoever, which is just, I can't get over how weird this looks, it's just strange, and installed it into my AMD 1700X Ryzen PC build that's in the Fantex P400S Tempered Glass Edition. I built it right here, but I took the custom loop out of it. Right now it's being cooled by Captain 240EX, and this card of course is just being passively cooled by the copper and aluminum combo we've got here. 3 copper pipes and just an aluminum heatsink. That's really all we've got going on here. Let's see what temperatures look like. Now right off the bat, after installing the latest Crimson driver for the RX 470, I realized that my temperatures were slowly climbing, and they didn't stop climbing until around 65-66 degrees Celsius, which is not a great idle temperature at all. And this, mind you, is at a stock frequency, just with auto-tuned voltages. I didn't bother tweaking anything up front. I wanted to have kind of a control test before we decided to tweak anything. I expected we'd have to drop the frequency and probably undervolt the GPU quite a bit. So I ran the superposition benchmark from Unigen. This is a super overkill benchmark. I'll have more detail on that in a separate video, but it just stresses the hell out of the RX 470, and yeah, the computer shut off in like 20 seconds or so. It actually throttled the GPU frequency down to a mere 300 megahertz on its own in an effort to keep temperatures below 90 degrees Celsius, but that didn't really help. After about 10 additional seconds upon throttling, the entire computer decided to shut off. Oh, and by the way, our FPS was terrible. We're talking low teens before the throttling, and once the throttling occurred down to 300 megahertz, our frame rate dropped to a mere 3 FPS. So obviously a few changes needed to be made. First up, I had to reinstall these fans and get that GPU to cool back down to around 3540C. Just put the fan curve on like 70-80%, and in about 20 seconds or so, the entire card cooled back down to what you would expect it to idle at, around 3540C, and then I just turned the fans off, so they weren't running after that point, even though they were still installed. That's why you see the fan LEDs. You'll see them in the next few clips of B-roll. So I decided to hop into the Wattman section of the Crimson driver and reduce my frequency down by 30%, which is the lowest that I could go. And then I also dropped my GPU voltage to 800 millivolts, also the lowest I could go. I wished that I could have dropped lower than that, but the Crimson software would not let me. And I really didn't think that that was low enough. 800 millivolts is only a 20% drop from what the card usually demands under full load. Most cards will require about a volt or so when they're under load. So 800 millivolts isn't a big drop, and that showed in the next set of tests that I ran with superposition. So even with the 30% drop in our original frequency, again starting from about 40 degrees Celsius, as well as a 20% drop in overall card voltage just to the GPU, the memory I didn't bother tweaking with, that wasn't going to have as big an effect as the GPU voltage was, I still ended up crashing the computer. It just took longer for that to happen. Temperatures stayed in the 70s and 80s for significantly longer. We actually almost finished the benchmark, which would have been enough for me. That would have been mission accomplished. But that was not the case. In fact, it began throttling again at 90 degrees Celsius, and once it did that, about maybe 30 or 40 seconds after, the PC turned off, and that was where I called it quits. I couldn't do it with an RX 470. I probably could get by with, I don't know, something just super underpowered. We're talking maybe like a GT 740. That might be a card that we could do it with. But for now, a mainstream card that you can game in 1080p, 1440p with and be comfortable is going to require some sort of fan or active cooling system. You just can't get by without a fan unless you're willing to compromise severely on performance. At that point, you might as well just buy something that is much cheaper, that won't bring the frame rate that you're originally looking for. So with that, I hope you at least enjoyed the experiment. I was just very curious. I wondered if I could do something like that and have a virtually silent graphics card apart from coil whine, which this one isn't really bad with. If you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, thumbs down for the opposite, click subscribe if you haven't already, and stay tuned for more videos like this. Just interesting stuff here on the channel. This is Salazar Studio. Thanks for learning with us and watching PCs crash.